Welcome back to History Surfer. This is Dr. A. If you're one of my students, you're watching this as a lecture for art appreciation. This is the photography lecture. Photography, if you don't know, is the medium that I practiced. I actually worked as a photographer. And so I have lots I'd love to say about it, but we're going to go over the basics. If you're watching this because you can't attend class, do know, of course, in person I always elaborate, but here we go. Photography, the word itself, photo means light and graph means writing, was really a concept that had been around for much longer than people believe. People like Leonardo da Vinci were interested in early experimentations with ideas of getting images to be, projected onto things, and we'll talk about that. But just know that it was the chemistry that was necessary to be perfected, and that was perfected in 1839. That's the patent. This is actually a little bit earlier that they're doing experimentation, but this is when we start talking about photography as a medium. The end date, 2009, is because that is the date that the last roll of actual film was made by Kodak, and it was it. Photography doesn't exist anymore. Things that you're taking with your phone, those of you who use a phone only, or even a digital camera. I use a digital camera now. In fact, I'm recording this on a digital camera. Know that this is not the same as photography. What you're doing is pixelating the world. This is actually writing with light. So let's begin. The very first idea that you could see things in a dark room called a camera obscura. Camera, that word there means room. Obscura, of course, we're talking in Italian, means dark. If you were in a totally darkened room and you had a hole in the wall, what would happen was an image would be projected onto the wall opposite from that hole, and you could see the outdoors. The only thing is it would be upside down. So this is the beginning of that idea, a fascination with the projection of images into dark rooms that people like Leonardo da Vinci were interested in. It wouldn't be until the lens was perfected, so we're talking this part here, and this, of course, comes about through people like Galileo, Copernicus. They were working on making better lenses to see into space, but at the same time, the work that was being done on those type of lenses could be incorporated by photographers. Artists, I should say. There's no such thing yet. What the lens does is it reduces the image. And so in this more portable camera obscura, the image would be projected onto, as it was a mirror. And then here at the top where you see the guy looking down through, that was glass, and then you could trace the image. Why did they want to do that? To learn how to make things look more realistic. The trajectory of realism in Western art is very strong, and of course, it's one of the reasons why the camera emerges in the West and not in the East. We are in love with looking at things that what we consider look real. By the time the first camera is invented, it is in the 19th century. It was a very simple thing. It's essentially a box with a hole in it. Of course, that box has to be light proofed if you're going to put film into it, because film is light sensitive. If you've never worked with film, you don't understand that everything with film you have to worry about is light. Light, light, light. It's the number one visual element photographers are interested in. This early camera, as you can see, has a lens. It's very simple. There's no shutter. That's the thing that controls motion. That's not going to happen until later. And you just simply open it and you close it. So let's talk about the people who were important in the development of this new medium. The first person we always talk about when we talk about this is Nicephore Niepce. Niepce was an amateur scientist, and he was a farmer actually. And he was interested in fixing the image to, in his case, a piece of glass. They kind of knew already that you could sensitize a surface by using silver, a silver coating. Silver is very sensitive to light. Anybody who has seen old silver, it tarnishes. It's because of heat and light. And paper and glass and tin could be coated with silver and it could become light sensitive. Niepce began his experimentation and he discovered a way to fix the image. We see his first image and the first image in photography here, and it's called A View from the Window at Le Gras. Le Gras was his farm where he lived, and this is from his studio. Well, we could call it not even a studio. I guess it would be more like a laboratory, would be more correct. And we know that by looking at it, it was a very, very long exposure. In other words, he opened up the lens of the camera and he left it open for a very long time. We know that because the shadows are both morning and afternoon shadows. And so it was potentially anywhere 5 to 8 hours of exposure time. Unfortunately for poor Niepce, he died very, very soon after that. And he never really benefited from his discovery. But he had shared his discovery with Louis Daguerre. Daguerre took that and worked it out a little bit more, and he would be the one to patent photography. He took this photo of Temple Boulevard in Paris, and he took it to the Royal Academy of Science, and he received the patent on photography, and so we call him the inventor of photography. Niepce makes the first image, Daguerre, inventor of photography. You can see here the limitations of this early experimentations and this final product, because as you notice, there's no people here except this one guy. Well, it's not because there was no one there on Temple Boulevard that day that Daguerre took this picture. In fact, there were probably quite a few people there. Paris was the third largest city in the world at that point. But there's no way to freeze motion yet. And so motion is not caught. So anybody moving would not be, you couldn't see them on this image. The only person we see, this guy here, where's my cursor? There it is because he's standing still. He's getting his shoe shined. Isn't that funny? He doesn't even know. He's the first person photographed. And yeah, it was all an accident. From there, we know that Daguerre made a ton of money. This is his camera. And he called the images he made daguerreotypes after himself. He sold many of these. He became quite wealthy off of this. Unfortunately, he lost most of his wealth in a hot air balloon thing he was working on. But his invention did indeed set the tone for the 19th century. It would be the William Fox Talbot, his rival, if you will, his English rival, who would be considered the father of modern photography because he invented the negative. A negative means you can have something that you can reproduce again and again and again and again. A daguerreotype, Daguerre's invention, was a one-time deal, much like a Polaroid. I know that you all know, most of you anyway, what a Polaroid is. It's one shot, you get one picture, that's it. There's no duplication. But with a negative, you can print things from that negative again and again and again. So this was much more lucrative, especially for photographers who were working, because now they could sell multiple prints of the same image. That's what I did. When I was a photographer, I did weddings for a while. And you would make prints from your negatives. Those were yours. You own them. And you would sell them packages. And so that's how you made money. This is his earliest work that he proves that his process worked. His process was called a calotype, by the way. But it certainly exploded. The whole medium just went crazy. It is going to become incredibly popular, and because of it, artists will lose work. Photography allows people to go into a photography studio and get their photo done for very small amounts of money versus having a painting of yourself done. And so artists weren't really happy with photography. In fact, photography will cause artists to move away from realism and develop the movement known as art for art's sake. Art for art's sake means we're going towards modern art when I say that. But let's talk about some of the technical aspects of the camera. A real camera has 2 settings that you can choose from. And with the theory of reciprocity, what you learn is if you do change one setting, you have to change the other one. Or if you had more of an automatic camera, it would automatically change it for you. But the setting that controls how much is in focus, otherwise known as the depth of field, is called the aperture. It's sitting on the top of the camera, right there on the lens, are these numbers. And you set the numbers according to how much you want in focus. The bigger the number, the more in focus. So for instance, this is a larger number, and you can see here more things in the background than this one, which is a smaller number. These numbers are called f-stops. It's a very long German word. You don't have to know. So I'm not even going to go there. But just know you can control it. You can make these choices. And a dedicated setting like the one that's on your phone, you don't have those choices. But as photographers, you want, you do. There's times where you want more stuff in focus. A lot of landscape photographers, really big f-stops. F42 is a famous club. They even, promote this idea of shooting landscapes at that high of a number. But just know it has that effect. And there's how the number, the leaf opening, that's called a leaf opening in there, gets smaller the higher the number, which seems counterintuitive, but this is just letting in more light, so less is in focus. This is letting in less light, so more comes in focus because it sharpens down on the image. Again, don't worry about that stuff. Just understand that, what they control. The other thing you can set on your camera is the shutter, and the shutter controls motion. Motion, how much you want to freeze it or not. So if you choose to have a blurred background like that, and the person stands still, you can do this. And tell them, stand still, I'm shooting a slow shutter speed, and you'll catch that. Or if you want to freeze this was one of my dogs is a puppy. As he was running towards me, I took this shot because I wanted to show how enthusiastic he was when he was running, and I wanted to catch his ears up in the air, so that's why I used the high shutter speed. It can really be something to play with, shutter. I am very much geared towards that. I shoot shutter priority mostly. This is actually an image I took, and it's as you can see, a horse race. I like that effect. I like the way that the feel of that speed of the horses racing. So photography was a booming industry. I mean, you could go into a photographer's studio in some places as little as I've read a nickel and get your photo done. It was different experience in the 19th century than it is today, because instead of saying smile, the photographer often said don't smile, because they didn't want to see your lips that couldn't freeze motion. So you had to be able to sit perfectly still, and you can see here this device to lean your head on so you wouldn't move your head by accident. And there's the photographer waiting and counting how long he's going to have his lens open for. Pictures of family members for posterity became incredibly popular. Again, no smiling. It's not because they're depressed, it's because no smiling. Don't move. Children were very difficult to take photos of, and so oftentimes you see these kind of weird arrangements of children, especially because I know this because when I put this in, I did the research on it. This child is dead. And they did that dead photo very often, especially of children, because it would be the only image they had of their child. It's kind of creepy and sad, but it was popular. And photographers traveled the world. They bought images to people that they would never be able to see. For instance, how many of you have seen the pyramids in person? If I say close your eyes and picture the pyramids, you can, but not because you've been to the pyramids. It's because of photography. So you can't discount this. It brings us to places we can't visit ourselves, like here's in Yosemite. It shows us events we can't participate in. Like, for instance, this is the building of the Statue of Liberty. And so it was just amazing. Things like 3D images were very popular. This is called a stereograph. And so you'd look through this little viewer here and you could see things in 3D. And people had images taken, these are called carte de visites, so that they could hand them out to their friends. You know, just like you guys post your image on things like Instagram, these people are handing photos out to their friends, for their friends, you know, perusing and enjoying perhaps their image. It also could do something that art hadn't really participated in. Up to this point, it's hard to show everyday things. Although, you know, we have the School of Realism develop. They do show people who are of the lower classes working and stuff like this. But these photographers could take a camera and get into places most people couldn't paint in, for instance. I'm just showing you a couple examples. This is Margaret Bourke-White. She was one of the first photographers to point out the abuses of diamond mining and how terrible it was for the people who were doing that in Africa. She also was a photographer who did work traveling the country during the Great Depression, showing the inequities of the experience of the American, you know, people. It was terrible. There was just different standards of living for different groups of people. And people like Steve McCurry opened our eyes up to the fact that under the Taliban, Afghani women were being treated unfairly. It's this image here. I'll show you. That's McCurry. That was published on the cover of Time magazine that made him so famous. And so these were ways that photography was different. Color was invented in 1936 when Kodak produced Kodachrome. And when Kodak did that, they definitely changed the way people looked at photos. They didn't produce a film per se for printing. They produce what's called slide film. Again, this is a positive, it's not a negative, so it's a one-time deal. Eastman Kodak was the people for film. Unfortunately, they have since gone out of business. That was 2009. We always look at that date where the last roll of Kodachrome was produced, and they no longer exist as a company. They went bankrupt. A slide looks like this. Again, I know you all are not familiar with these. But color does add another dimension to photography. For me, black and white's much more interesting, and so I tend to stick to that. But I just wanted, of course, you to be aware of what that all happening. But that's the end of the lecture for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day, and peace out.